Alright, we're going to start the quarterfinals if those teams are ready. I think we can start with a round of intro. I'll first introduce myself and then I'll let my panelists introduce themselves. My name is Youngwoo, I'll be sharing this round. I will prefer pronoun. Yeah.
Okay, hi everyone, Paolo, all the best.
Hi, David.
Hi, Namita, good luck.
Alright, can we now ask the side government to introduce yourselves in the speaking order?
Wayne will prefer.
I'm doing deputy and replying to people.
Kita doing for THBT.
Thank you. Opposition.
Yes, Asam going first, Kuan going second and reply, Danish going third, all of us have no preferred gender pronouns.
Alright, cool. I'll be using the debate keeper app, so you will hear the bell ring at 7:15. After 7:15, please wrap up your speech down, as judges will not be writing down anything after that. Alright, and also reminder to observers, please keep your voice down so we can hear what the debaters are saying. And with that said, on the motion, the sponsor believes that young artists from countries with prominent variant of global languages should aggressively prioritize producing art in their variant languages over global languages. I would invite the Prime Minister to start the debate.
Media is important in terms of increasing cultural acceptance between different groups of people, but if that understanding is premised on a false conception of what that culture is, we don't think there's any value to that. We think that aggressively prioritizing looks like predominantly making content that contains variant languages. It also looks like, for instance, providing more state funding to artists who make such products in the first place. One piece of clarification, we think that artists on the outside who create art based on variant languages are still likely to succeed. And we think there are a few reasons for this. The first reason is because good art, good music tends to always be popular anyways. For instance, things like Despacito is a foreign language but still does very well in English-speaking countries, for example. Secondly, there's always an interest in terms of understanding variant languages because they are novel and they are unique. Notice that as a young artist, you're competing against many kinds of artists who are producing music based on global languages anyways, which means to say that you're able to stand out from the crowd, which is why there's a propensity for you to succeed. But lastly, even if you don't succeed on the global stage, you still get regional success because of the fact that other countries around you also have similarities within culture, which means that you're able to benefit from regional success anyways. We don't think that artists will die out on the outside of the house. Our first argument then is why, our first and our case rather, is why is it important that you showcase an accurate depiction of your own culture. The first thing I want to note is that variant languages are spoken by people on the ground. They often are a combination of various cultures within the country and the global language that is being spoken by people on the ground. So they contain many pieces of vernacular languages and they tend to be the main form of communication within the country as well. For instance, Singlish contains many kinds of words from Malay, English, and Chinese as well. This is how people predominantly communicate and understand English or global languages as a whole. And the reason why I think this important is because often global languages are difficult to understand. The fact that English contains many rules, for example, like past, present tense, or these kinds of rules that exist, means it's difficult for the average person to understand global languages, which is why they often turn towards variant languages as a way to replace certain rules within the grammar of that language, so they can better understand and better interpret it. That's how people communicate on the ground, and that's why there's a mixing of different kinds of elements within that language. The conclusion of this analysis is this: most people care about variant languages. It's the way that they self-actualize. It's a part of their culture, and it's a way that they communicate with people on the ground. What happens then when an artist chooses to use global languages such as like Parisian French or like American English? The first problem is that it tends to insinuate that mainstream global languages are far more important than your variant languages, that there's a standard towards global languages that people ought to follow, that every other form of English or French or whatever global language out there is fundamentally illegitimate, that is not a real language, and that is a bunch of random people talking nonsense in the first place. For instance, Quebecian French is often demonized by people living in mainland France, and Quebecians are often seen as rural people, as people who are not smart, as people who can't communicate properly because of the fact that people in France don't understand the accents or the way in which Quebecian people speak French. And people in mainland France often use this as justification to perpetuate stereotypes surrounding people living in Quebec by saying that these people are rural, that these people are stupid, for instance. And that's how people who speak global languages often use the superiority of global language in a way to justify their demonization of other people. Yes?
Why do you think most people in this room are wearing Western clothes instead of local clothes?
I would look in the best world scenario, right? We should all be speaking our own variant language. I should be able to speak Singlish when I communicate to you guys. But at the end of the day, that's not how the world works because unfortunately we have to speak our own language as a whole. For instance, in Jamaica, the English Jamaican language is variants often demonized by most global countries who speak English, and they're often seen as stupid. And often these stereotypes are perpetuated by the fact that global languages take a precedence over variant languages. The problem, therefore, is this: when young artists choose to make music or art that only pertains towards global languages, that's when you reinforce these stereotypes. That's when you reinforce that speaking the global language is more important than speaking the variant language. And the reason for that is that these artists tend to be prominent members of their own community. They tend to be the forefront of culture within these places, which means to say that at the point where they only speak, when they create art that only has global languages, that's when you reinforce the conception that those variant languages are illegitimate, that only these global mainstream languages, the way that's been created, is the proper way to speak those languages. The second harm of this is that often people within your own country cannot appreciate the kinds of art that these people create because they just simply don't understand them because of the fact that they contain the rules that fundamentally is different, that alienates rules of the grammar that means that you cannot understand. So this alienates people within your own country as well. We put to you two things. One is that in our world, not only your local communities are better able to understand your global language, the art that you create, because they pertain towards variant languages as a whole. So there's more understanding with people on the ground, so you get more catharsis as well. Secondly, many people are fundamentally more happier because you are able to see your own culture be accurately represented. So you no longer feel that same level, you feel more catharsis when you see those pieces of art being created. But the third thing I want to note is that at the very least, you can take away stereotypes. We don't think that stereotypes will be eliminated immediately after this motion is done, but we think that in the next 10, 20, 30 years, at the point where more of your young artists one day get prominent, is a point where people from France, for instance, understand what Quebecians are actually saying, or people in Britain, for instance, understand what people speaking Singlish are saying. And that's how you get better cultural understanding and deconstruct the kinds of stereotypes that are surrounding these languages from the start to begin with. Let's then do some comparisons and some weighing. On their side, they potentially get more outreach because maybe more people in the global countries are able to understand these songs and languages. The first thing I want to point out is that the way that culture is represented is different on both sides fundamentally. On our side, we show you true culture. We show the variants of that language. We show you how people interact on the ground. On their side, they spread culture through things like music videos that showcases things like locations, for instance. The first piece of mitigation I want to point out is there are other ways to show the kind of culture on their side. We can do things like, for instance, tourism promotion boards that often showcases cultural landscapes within your own country to people on the global world. There are ways to do this already. In comparison, there is no way to actually showcase your own local variant languages on the outside. So we put to you that this is an exclusive benefit that we get in terms of showcasing a part of your culture that would never be showcased under their side of the house. Secondly, it's the fact that, worst case, if we don't showcase any forms of culture, at the very least, we don't reinforce stereotypes, so we don't cause a net harm towards people on the ground. Their side might be able to showcase some culture, even though we already explain why it's not exclusionary, but we put to you that it comes at the cost of reinforcing stereotypes. It comes at the cost of putting the metropole ahead of former colonial territories where these languages necessarily exist. For these reasons, we propose.
Alright, thank you, Prime Minister, for that speech. Leader of the opposition.
Kuan and Ram always make fun of me for being an art snob. Because when I listen to music, I don't just listen to the lyrics. I listen to the production, I listen to how this music was particularly made, and I listen to all these other aspects. But the problem that we have to realize is, there are more people in this world, like Kuan and Ram, than there are people in this world like me. Because most people, the starting point to appreciating any form of music is the lyrics. If I don't understand what is being said, I am unlikely to vibe in this music with the ways that side government talked about. Because all you're getting in your world is maybe some people bopping their head to your music, but you're unlikely going to get the level of cultural understanding that they want to claim that happens on their side of the house. Number one, music is not just lyrics, it is production as well. That means we can co-opt things like cultural inclusions in our music by utilizing instruments of your culture within the music itself. Priya Raghu, who is a famous Indian artist, can use tablas in the song where she speaks in English and where she raps in English. No, you cannot hear to that because you're talking about language alone. You're not talking about production. You're not talking about music. You're talking about simply the language that is being spoken in. Therefore, for a listener, lyrics is then a starting point for them to start enjoying other aspects of your music. But secondly, is the illustration of what this music looks like. I think we got a fair explanation, but in short, in an album, you would probably have more songs in a variant language than you would have in another language in their world, whereas in our world, it's vice versa. But secondly, it's also recognizable. Where, for example, inside of government, when people hear your music, they're going to be thinking, I don't know where this particular music is from. I don't know where this region is from. Like when Sonawan says buka seluar in the car, it means open your pants in the car. But I don't know what that particularly means, right? When I listen to this song. Therefore, people are unable, especially international listeners, are unable to vibe with the music that you want, that you say is going to happen. The point I'm trying to make here is in their world, this music will be seen as niche. Because the best case is, some people will research and scroll through some of your songs, you might even gain some fans, but the clincher is that the point of commonality you make between yourself as the artist and the listener is one that is extremely deteriorated, and therefore your likelihood of success is one that is going to be decreasing. I will weigh out against all these arguments about representation, etc. later. Wait. Firstly then, why is exposure important? Guys, it's art. Number one, it's damn hard to be successful. It's a field that is founded on creativity, and creativity is incredibly subjective. And when we're dealing with such a subjective subject matter, we have to be able to make it as objective as possible. That means if I can't control how people are going to react when they listen to my music, I can at least make sure my lyrics are understandable by the listener. Therefore, I can sing about love, I can create that point of relatability with someone who has experienced the same level of heartbreak that I have. But secondly, it's an incredibly saturated market. Guys, there's so many artists that exist in this world, in the era of TikTok, in the era of the internet, in the era of SoundCloud, where it's so accessible to be an artist. But the problem is, it's accessible to be an artist, but it's incredibly difficult to be a successful artist. And that is the burden that you have to defend. But thirdly then, is the lack of resources, especially when you are from these countries, Malaysia, Haiti, Singapore. In these countries, the music scene is really small. The amount of resources that you have, the record labels that are willing to fund you are ones that are incredibly tight in nature, which means you are going to be probably traded off in favor of other more internationally recognizable artists. Because even if you want to defend that our music labels can exist in different regions, the point of the matter is this music industry is centered in the West, which means as long as the West is unable to vibe with your music, it's unlikely that these different branches of labels that exist within these regions are going to fund you as well. How do we then get this exposure in a much better way? Firstly is the universality of English. 3 reasons why. Number one, English is a global medium of communication, where it's taught in most education institutions around the world, where it's being taught as the way that you exchange opinions with people, the way you converse with people, etc. But secondly, outside of your own country and ethnicity, that is how you build the point of commonality. When you're unsure of what language a particular person speaks, you go up to them and you speak English, because that is how you create that point of commonality. But thirdly then, the entertainment industry is one that is predominantly in English. When we look at Hollywood, when we look at record labels, all these things are centered within Western mediums, and therefore all the resources are concentrated in this area as well. But secondly then, on market capture, 3 reasons for this as well. Number one, the volume of people that understand this variant language. They claim that in the worst case, they get regional success. The problem is not everyone understands this variant language even within this context, right? And I think I'll use the second reason to support the first one, which is the veracity of these languages. Even within the languages that you want to defend, there are many versions of it. For example, if I say kasi lit, doesn't mean you understand Manglish, you're going to understand what I just said, because that is my version of Manglish that I share with my friends. Therefore, you're unable to share that point of commonality even within regional listeners, because they don't know what version of this Manglish that you're speaking. But thirdly then, is the palatability compatibility or what listeners appreciate is one that is incredibly indoctrinated by Western culture. We listen to English songs, we watch English movies. I grew up listening to or consuming English media, and that is the only way that I learned how to speak English. Therefore, a lot of times you are going to be locking yourself into a corner where you are unable to tap into this market. Go.
Your case is predicated on people not understanding these songs, but the majority of variant languages still contain a lot of words from the global language. What is the tipping point to people totally understand the song?
Yes, I already acknowledged this in the framing itself. People might say, I know that word, bukan seluar in the car, I know what in the car means, I'm going to do some research. They might scroll through some of your songs, but these other songs got so many things I don't understand, I'm just going to tune out from this. Versus in our world, where people already understand the language, they're more likely going to be like, hey, I want to listen to this song again, I want to listen to other songs that also have words, more words that I understand. I don't get this comparative. But firstly then, you're more likely to shape that point of commonality with you and your listener, which means more people listen to your music. But secondly, you're able to capture large markets in our world, and the impact of this will prove the likelihood of success. On weighing then, number one, can people enjoy music they don't understand? Firstly, for international listeners, it might be possible, but it's likely not to be sustainable because people can't relate to it. But secondly, on regional success, I think this is not as certain as they want to claim, because many artists will be producing music in local languages. That means your local language predominant artists are going to win over your variant languages even within the region itself, because that is the language that people mostly understand. Versus if you speak English, people can be proud of the fact that you're platforming this culture on such a global scale. But secondly, then on representation, they say that people get oppressed for their language. They don't explain why people suddenly change this. In fact, they concede in the POI that is the way the world works. Why is the world changing on the side of government is one that I don't understand. But secondly, even if we trade off this representation, I get money. Money insulates me from oppression. Money insulates me from the level of discrimination that you want to talk about. Therefore, in our world, in the future, I can still go back to these variant languages. You can't, because people will say you're whitewashed. Leave my culture alone.
Alright, thank you, leader of the opposition.
So this is a diverse panel, and for the past 30 minutes I've been trying to prove or figure out how to find out what you guys are looking for, the 5 of you, and how to make myself easier to understand. And at the end, I thought it was for naught, because not only is it the case that Malaya is obviously more brilliant in articulation, I just simply cannot make a good speech out of what 5 different people might want. The only way I can make my piece of art good and competitive was to infuse it with my experience, my values, and my languages. That's the best work that then I can possibly produce in an area where I have my comparative advantage in. Most importantly, independent of outcome, this is what enables me to feel proud of my piece of work and joy creating it. This premise specifically will allow me to trade off against Pop's best case on practical outcomes to artists. But make no mistake, this is a trade-off. I'm going to win that clash first. Much love. Firstly then, on why artists then will still be successful on outside the house. 2 reasons. The first is the ability to connect with audiences. It's the most important thing for artists, especially for young artists serving a young audience, because this is oftentimes the kind of people that share unique perspective in individuality and identity, and finding themselves in different perspectives and experiences. So the more different and unique your experience, and the more it is that you share with other people, the more it makes you an effective artist. And therefore, in order to tell your story in a maximal way that best connect with people, you have to use then this capacity for you to be gifted with this language, because of the fact that also other people who are young like you likely speak the language as opposed to the local people who are potentially a bit older, given that some countries, like in the info slide or in the other motion, destroy local languages, and therefore this is likely the default language by which a lot of these people speak. The second is on the comparative advantage of how you can potentially be better. You can learn a language and become proficient with it, yes, but the bar for you to clear, to bring up emotion with it, is an extremely difficult one. So I can speak English fairly well and you can understand me, but I still think in Vietnamese, and that chaps, look at the words that are coming out of my mouth. It's hard because I have to translate. So I cannot actually give you what I want to give you internally because I just fundamentally don't have the capacity to grapple with that language the same way they can, right? So think about, for example, like in ESL speakers like Ruman and Nikki who have had to find ways to bring up more in the speech to compete in terms of, like, for example, bring up more analysis instead of just pulling on your heartstrings. Similarly, at the end of the sentence in Singlish or Manglish with the la and the lay, that opens up your avenue to use and play with like more wording for rap, for example, and that allows you to get specifically better a way in which other white artists can possibly not. How then is this a preferable way to get to success? The first is you want to weigh off the number of people that get exposure to the number of people that you get increased connectivity to. I'll posit to you that oftentimes, in order to get people to support your work, they have to be connected to it, as opposed to just simple people getting exposure. My example for this would be strangely OnlyFans. The most successful people on this platform are people who cater to very niche needs because of the fact that they have the strongest capacity for comparative advantage. They can specifically cater to your needs. So if it's the case that I'm a Singaporean who speaks English and I want to hear someone say something in English specifically, is where I'm more likely to spend more money on this. And this is a strange need that has no bottom zero-sum game, because if it's the case that I feel represented, then I'm willing to spend more money. On their side, it's a zero-sum game because they have to displace a current white artist that then these people are already spending on. The second, and quite frankly, is you have more autonomy over your art in comparison to how people may be receptive to it. Like, I don't think any artist has been successful by choosing the right audience. And the reason for that is because on their side of the house, there's massive competition as well, in as opposed to like all these people. The quantity doesn't reach a tipping point, which means that fundamentally you have to prioritize being connected on the capacity for you to relate and connect to audience as opposed to just the number of people that can feasibly access your art. Clarification then, they say that mixed language is they say that like the comparative is potentially you have like local languages and then like that is the better comparison and you might lose out to these people. But I want to point out that mixed language is what I think in these places a lot of people use. The first is, as what I've described, like oftentimes these countries also move away from the specific local language because it's just a little bit more English friendly and like better for the business context. The second is that I think specifically young people are more likely to speak it because of their exposure to the West, and therefore this is just something that they talk more about and you need to cater specifically to that audience. The third is that on the comparative, I think English is just a tougher competition. Go.
Yes, if I'm willing to spend thousands on OnlyFans, it's because the benefits are great. Why would I do that for music?
Because you feel like you support this artist. In fact, the artist might not even be good, but the fact that he tries to get the words that I cannot put the words out of my mouth. He can slightly better than me. I feel connected to his story and his values, and therefore I'm going to support it, and therefore I put money into it. Like I think I've decisively proven to you why connectedness gives you more money as opposed to just simply exposure. You need to weigh up against that. So I want this clash outright. What I'm going to do now is to trade off as to why this is not the most important material, and you need to think more about what Wayne said regarding how you get representation to the people and the other externalities. There are three premises to this. The first is, as Hassan rightly pointed out, I don't think this is a tipping point to becoming successful. And because as he pointed out, there's still like production, there's still the various other matters. So maybe it's the case that your language can now be accessed because people immediately understand. But then what? Do people like it more? Do people spend more money on it? I'm not quite sure if it's the case that they've really proven this. The second and more important is success is only a means towards happiness. I think on our side of the house, we directly give the artist happiness. And the reason for that is because I think most artists have a gift to make people feel certain things. And they're proud of that gift. And then they're proud of the fact that they can do something different and unique and potentially difficult, which is why they opted to become an artist over literally anything else. So if it's the case that you have the capacity to be a voice of the people who cannot get the voice out there, then it gives you inherent meaning in opting for this specifically. This is a direct benefit that applies to all the artists out there who can use this gift to give voice to the people who have a slightly harder time getting it out there. I think this is a more important benefit to the artist as opposed to potentially exposure or fame, or in fact even money. The third is maybe it's the case that artists are likely to not be very successful anyway. Like it's just incredibly difficult. And if that's the case, if you cannot if you cannot see the tipping point in success, maybe it's less important to just like do the nitty-gritty of where success is marginally more important and focus on the other comparative regarding the actualization and happiness and pride you get out of your work. The last is this. Maybe some artists are more successful on their side, but the quantity is small. Like the structural difficulty is still there. So they get one or two more artists, but I'm not quite sure if it's the case that it passes a tipping point to meaningful impact. But given that we then allow most minority artists to become far more happy on our side of the house, then that's something that's important to be traded off for. But I still think we do win the clash on why is it the case that our artists are also more powerful, more successful. The last thing there is a comparative. I think on their side of the house, they're vulnerable to, for example, other artists coming in to culturally misappropriate or like being completely tone deaf in annotation. Think about like how a lot of the time like the white artists come down to find some new material like Shakira and Drake, etc. I think in that scenario, what you do then is that you lose also this competitive advantage to these other artists because there is a clear market for it, and oftentimes these artists do try to go to a local market to establish that connectivity because it's so like profitable because of the fact that it works business-wise. So in that case scenario, then I think what you have to grapple then is the fact that you lose this out of this market share and potentially for your artists to not be able to access this capacity to create art that does in fact give them meaning. For all these reasons, please start with government.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for that speech. Do I really get the opportunity?
Wait, 1 second. Tan is right. I don't know what the 5 of you think. I don't know how many in the panel actually. But the point here is that if I make my music thinking that I know what local norms are, local culture, and therefore you buy me, it's when I lost the race. Because I must make myself much more palatable to frame my success rate and to be more successful in the long run. That's why focus on global outreach gives you the starting point of more success to propel forward. Later on, when you're more stable, I can claim the entire Gov team's benefits. Here's how I'm going to structure this speech. First, I'm going to talk about success. Second, I'm going to talk about regional influence, which is their only benefit. And third, I'll explain what artist fulfillment looks like. First, I want to talk about success. Note that their case has 2 mechanisms as to why they achieve success. First was intuition pump, which I'm unsure why it applies across all contexts, and intuition pump is shit actually. They talked about Despacito, you know, some avenue of being famous. Dates by the Daddy Yankee and Justin Bieber. Obviously people are going to listen. That's not nuance to a young artist. Their second mechanism was people care about variance. Judge, take notes. What was their mechanism that people care about variance? Nothing. It was mentions of self-actualization, mentions of related to identity, mentions of proximity. These are characteristics of local culture, not mechanism on why people are able to appreciate local culture. PM's speech was just a dump of analysis, but not mechanistic link on why this is the dichotomy of how people are going to act. The important nuance is, if I'm able to convince you that the psyche of people as an average person is more likely to be palatable towards global music, even their Shakira analysis and all that, we take this debate. Let's talk about psyche. Why are people more likely to listen to our music? It's important to note there's an average music listener, as they concede, is also an important stakeholder to become famous, because process of being nothing to famous is on average person. The starting point is important. Their side, the music is unrecognizable when you hear it the first time. Why is acknowledgement and understanding of lyrics an important precursor for them to appreciate your music? No, thank you. Number 1 is because it's in line with the core tenets of art. Art is a mixture of, first, technical and aesthetic value that looks like lyrics. Second, cognitive value, which is how you feel about the music. And third, what is the message intended by the artist when writing that? It's a accumulation of both. That's why all the most famous scriptures or art manufacturers in the world embody all these things, like Taj Mahal, symbol of love, also an amazing architecture. The point is that it's all 3. In their side, at best, people can at least appreciate the technical value of the music, but you lose on the cognitive value. You don't know how, or you're not empathized by the feeling of the music because you don't understand. You lose on what's the message intended by the music. That's why you miss out on some of the core tenets of art. That's why people are likely to be turned off. Like, Make Me Swear, the song, the Make Me Water by Tyla, if it's in like what, Mandarin or what, you won't know the impact of that. There is a sexual innuendo to begin with. That's the second part. You're more likely to miss out on the other subliminal innuendos, like the Tyla example, right? There's a sexual innuendo, but you won't know that. That's why not recognizing the music turns off an average person, especially when they are short attention span and you're competing with other Taylor Swifts and Olivia Rodrigo. There's more familiarity. The degree of you researching, having incentive to listen is in our side, because at least the starting point is in the same wheelhouse. You're learning English. Then we can diversify our creativity. Note, both sides says you can be creatively accessing different ways to propel. I agree.
But the ability to access this creative mechanism is contingent on the starting point people listen to you. We make it easier when they first understand what you're saying, and then you allow an opportunity to do all this creative thing. You locked out them on their side of the house. That's why it's exactly, the first mechanism is clear. Our metric of success is that the starting point for an average person is much more clear in our world. They had to debunk that. Second, record deals and sponsorship. In our world, your music is palatable. Profit incentive motive of the music industry will likely sign you because they want to have streams. They want to have a larger capture of audience. They don't care so much about identity because profit incentive motive is their number one. That's why they're more likely to sign you and recruit you. Secondly, you can use your identity as a selling point. In our world, when you become famous, the fact that you wear your local clothes, you go into interviews that can explain in greater airtime in Hollywood, that transcends across a lot of other frameworks that don't even have this opportunity. Western liberalism and Hollywood is inevitably the conglomerate that holds power in the music and entertainment industry. Allowing your opportunity to propel or start there is when you get a better starting point to talk about your culture. I would argue that's much greater in your world. Why is this debate winning? Number one, the fact that we prove to you the pathway of greater money accesses greater agency. The most rational weighing metric here, Judge, is choice. If you go through some suffering because you feel your culture is misappropriated, go to therapy. You have more money now. You feel like life is hell, go for a holiday. Money is able to access a plethora of ways that make you happy. They have to successfully deal with it because it also insulates yourself from the suffering that you talked about. No, thank you. Number two, access to expert knowledge. When you become big and you get international debaters, that's when you meet the David Africas. You can ask the other international people who are great to give you expert knowledge. And the reason why this is important because we don't know if this artist truly wants fame. We don't know if the artist truly wants success. We have no epistemic access. What is crucial here is knowledge is definitely something you care about because you're in line or passionate about that sport. That means having access to other better debaters to give you knowledge. That's happening in our world. When you open up more networking, open up more expertise, when you're much more palatable, that's in line with the average person in this debate and not convenient and someone who just cares about culture. Before moving on to the second question, go for it, Wayne.
The problem is that people won't look at the variant language from these countries, they'll look at cultural landmarks from these places. We explain to you why is it that language is so important as a cultural piece, you need to engage with them.
I don't know why this is suddenly a tourism debate. If it's true that people see India and think about Taj Mahal, your case is dead. You think about Taj Mahal and not your local music. That washes out your case. I don't know why that makes sense. Second, let's talk about regional influence. Number one, don't let them get away by having to say they will be successful in the regional industry. Why? Because if you're truly local and artists care about local by your own characterization, won't they go for the purely Malay songs? Won't they go for the purely African songs instead of one that's a mix? I'm literally limiting the sample space of the success rate. Second, by virtue of the motion. The motion says prioritize local or global. That suggests to me that this person actually has an opportunity to be great and global. That means he's probably much better than the average person as well. Capitalize on your lyrics and your creativity rather than fitting into a wheelhouse that is so saturated. Number three, there's very minimal success rates that's proven. Because Hollywood is conglomerated and it's big. I'm unclear if you're a Malaysian artist, Eritrean artist, how you're able to get regional influence when there's also a symmetry of power internally. The way is that their biggest benefit is super marginal. And secondly, creativity is not exclusive insofar as you can practice in so many other ways. You can practice your culture with your local family. You can wear your local dress. You can talk about your local culture when your platform and airtime in interviews. That's why it's not exclusive. Final part of this speech on weighing of fulfillment of artists. As mentioned, because we have no epistemic access towards what this artist actually thinks about. Why do we win the debate then? Because we don't have epistemic access, which side is able to co-opt most realistically? We prove culture is co-opted, we prove our access to information is likely towards an average person, and prove that we have agency. Hazwitan should go back home.
Yeah.
I'm nursing a bit of a sore throat, but am I audible? Okay, give me a minute while I sort my words. When I I first saw Viha and Amrit debate and they used Singlish and Manglish, I was so proud. Because as a debater, I was told I could only use the standard of English or I would never get above an 80. That as a debater, I can only use British and British accent for a WSDC accent for me to be able to score high. I reject that narrative. Proud to oppose. I'm proud to propose. I'm going to do a few things. 1, clarifications. 2, on buy-in. 3, on local buy-in, because they refuse to engage with that. 1, on a few things. They ask, why do we not wear traditional clothes? Number 1, we do. Look at UT Mara. But 2, I use Singlish when I debate, right? The idea here is that clothing and languages are not the same. Because firstly, language is more pervasive and they are oftentimes used for most things. But 2, it's hard to take off. Because I can't take off my Singlish accent, guys. Like, unfortunately, I'm built with it. I'm born with it. It's hard for me to take this off. Therefore, it's not the same as clothing. 2, do we understand this? Yes, because because the variants often come from one language. So a Parisian French person understands Quebecian precisely because they're from the same language anyways. And they also oftentimes know of these languages to begin with. But even if they cannot, the idea here is that Asan says you will not understand, which means there's no money. But there is, because Despacito gets a shit ton of money. Right? The idea here is that if you're going to use the intuition against them, who cares if no one listens to Despacito or looks up their lyrics? Because you get money anyway, so we assess the same benefits that we have. So you don't care about whether this person necessarily understands your language if we can get the money to begin with. So no, we think that you cannot understand the language but simultaneously still get the money to be able to counteract your language. Lastly, what are variant languages? And the importance of this is very, and there's a very important thing to this. Wayne gives you 2 mechanisms. The first is that there are unique rules, such that it makes it not fully mutually intelligible. So like charot, ame, lale, law in Singlish, for example, charot and ame in Philippines. So, or like the idea here is that the acquisition is different. But number 2, even though they're not fully mutually intelligible, the historic context of where these things come from is because we are Creole languages. We use English and then we merge it together with our home languages. So guys, Malays in Malaysia don't only use Malay in communication, they also mix it with English. Same as Singapore, same as other countries. This is important. There's 3 things. Number 1, that they are important because this is the way we communicate on a day-to-day basis. Panel, this is the way in which most of us communicate. We do not ever fully use our first languages or our second languages or our third languages. We merge them together into a melting pot. And that's how we dominate debate. That's how we communicate. Number 2, that you cannot assimilate into this. Asan and like Kuhan's understanding is absolutely bizarre because they tell me that I have to make it more palatable. The counterfactual is probably worse because you need to make it palatable for the white audience. But the comparative is if I grew up with this audience and I grew up with this language, it's hard to not assimilate. So cool. Lastly, that is important in terms of why people don't like pure languages. The idea here is that the reason why rap music and other music likes to make, or even K-pop for example, mixes Korean with English for example, is precisely because it appeals to both languages either. But even if it's true that you don't understand them, again, right, K-pop is famous even though most people don't know what you're saying. I can be like, well, twice cheer up maybe, right? But the idea here is that I don't necessarily care about what they're saying, but it sounds nice, it nets me a shit ton of money. Anyways, the idea of K-pop is very important because most of us, sorry lah, don't necessarily understand Korean. So the idea here is that even if we don't, it still has a very high popularity. 2 things therefore. 1 on international buy-in, 2 on local buy-in. On international buy-in, it's interesting, so we can co-opt this. There's an interest in languages never responded to. 2, the process of enregisterment. So oftentimes the way you legitimize a language is you create things like dictionaries. So that's why if you go to Singapore, you can actually buy a dictionary to see the slang, for example. Right? This is important because this allows you to access those kinds of languages anyways. Lastly, it's unique and exotic, so people think it's really, really cool. That's why when you go to another place, you always ask how do I say hello, thank you in these countries? Why is this important? The fact that it's unique and exotic means that people have incentive to care about it anyways. But even if it's true, and you get some legitimization, here's the thing. They say that in these kinds of languages, you can be more comprehensible and can cater to the majority. And you can cater to that. Here's the thing, right? The struggle of an ESL and AFL debater is that we can speak the most perfect English out there. But the average racist judge will still see you as a piece of trash and will grade you a 69 anyways. The biggest problem with trying to play respectability politics with the majority is pretty simple. Is that you're playing on their grounds, you're whitewashing on their grounds, but you're not even guaranteed to succeed precisely because of the fact you'll always see your identity first and you second. The idea here is that on comparative, the culture is significantly easier to not do so. But number 2, they say that English is widely profitable and therefore has increased outreach. It's often unequal, so it's the burden push. their comparative is that, and first speaker concedes this, right? When they say there's SoundCloud, there's Spotify. So the question then becomes, why is you and like a minority from like no one knows where, speaking perfect English, going to compete with X individual, white individual, the entirety of America and Britain, who speaks perfect English as well? The idea here is that if it's so saturated, the comparative is they have to defend that. On our side, we get the ability to do so. So here's a counterfactual. The first is that it's unique to international individuals, but familiar to locals. So barriers are transcended, but there's also lower barrier to resistance. Before I move on, go.
If your average racist judge is going to give the English-speaking ESL a 69, what are they going to in ESL?
They are going, firstly, like the idea here is if you're going to get a 69 on either side, you should stay true to your culture anyways. That's the comparative. But the idea here is that on their side of the house, they don't prove their burden. Because they need to prove why you speaking perfect English and the perfect way of going so nets you the ability to succeed to that degree. We've proven it to you two ways, both on the local and international level. They have a problem with burdens. Next thing, right? Even if it's true that there's some legitimization, mitigation one, that you're from the community, so the representations like these people, right? But number two, they are subsequently delegitimized in the counterfactual anyways because of the scale, because you come from a place that uses the language and you're an ethnic minority, right? If you're double, you're in the Philippines, you're Singapore versus the standard English, then the idea is you will be discriminated even if you use the standard. The comparative is on local buy-in therefore, and this is the win con that they want to engage in and only spend 10 seconds on it. Why is this important? One, because you locally generally speak the language and therefore there's a connection with it, right? But two, because on the counterfactual you don't grow. It's a waste of opportunity. It's a lot harder to connect with the local audience precisely because you as a Singaporean don't like capitalize on this. The unique other context is well that most local places like use they use the mixed languages, right? And have niches on them. So Singapore has Singaporean theatres, right? Like Japan has Japan-specific theatres, right? And they all use Singlish and their respective Creoles respectively. Why is this important? One, it's a waste of opportunity and it's hard to get a local buy-in oftentimes because you have to compete. But two, it's often hard to capture the minds and hearts locally. But the impact is simple and twofold. The first is the impact to you as a young person, you grew up with the language, you didn't communicate. But two, it trumps the official language that oftentimes your variant seems inferior, seen as funny, you can take that narrative. 4 layers of trade-off. One, uncertainty. You can capture the hearts and minds of people locally as compared to the uncertainty of the competition on comparative. 2, on long term, that using this can build up your money and build up your niche. 3, impact to self. They often feel like a colonial show on the comparative. But 4, on scale. The very few minorities will watch you versus the increase in access. Never been prouder to
I think we got the topic.
Pick it up.
The first problem from their side is that they assume the power of music is invincible. It's as if the way in which the British colonized Malaysia was by playing the Beatles, and the way we fought back against the Beatles was playing Malaysian individuals who sang in English. That's right, go away, colonizers, we are listening to our own music. Makes no sense. They have to show why is it that the metric of this debate is one on how we can challenge and deconstruct stereotype and bias as opposed to what are the real impacts and experiences of music, particularly to young artists in niche contexts. So if they want to claim that they win on colonization or whatever nonsense, fine. But we will tell you that firstly, there is an incredibly difficult burden that they have yet to dislodge. And secondly, why it is not comparative in terms of weighing for our impacts and metrics of the debate. Firstly on the issue of money, I want to say that in the best of cases, money is largely symmetrical. Why? Because if you are able to use your culture in such a nuanced and different way and still achieve success, great, you have money. But how likely is that to happen for a majority of young artists that are not named Daddy Yankee, that have a feature with Justin Bieber? How likely is that going to happen? Compared to our side, no. Compared to our side, most individuals, while it is true that they have large competition in local contexts, The thing is, they are different enough to show that they are new, but they have a point of commonality that makes them accessible to a wide range of audiences. So even if we cannot claim that we can compete in numbers to Taylor Swift, we can definitely compete with numbers with other artists that are not as popular as her, because we still have a point of commonality in various different regions all around the world. That's why people like Thames and Tyler are successful in our world as opposed to yours, right? It's very unlikely that this is the situation that is going to happen. So in the best cases, money is symmetrical, but they don't prove why it is likely that these young artists, no mechanistic analysis, will achieve these best case scenarios. In most likelihoods, they will fail, and when they fail, they will give up. You cannot claim that. They will be very satisfied, at least they practiced their identity. Second is, they claim that we are pandering to white people, and that is the worst thing you can do in a debate. First of all, if you ask me to pander to a white person and I earn a lot of money, I'll take it. It's not an issue. Fuck my culture. What is more important is, it's not true that white people are the main stakeholders of listeners of music. We argue, even the info slide tells you this is a global language. Therefore, a lot of people outside of white context speak English because they've been colonized. Therefore, if you want to value things like culture and niches, even these groups of people can do that. It should not be a problem. Lastly is, they don't respond at all to any material from Asan about the veracity of these variant languages. So even if you want to buy that there's potential in these variant languages and how they can separate themselves, how are they going to separate themselves to a level that can still be common when so many people speak so many different dialects within these variant languages? So many people may or may not understand, and this will devalue your ability to be successful in this world. If they want to continue with this line of analysis, they first needed to engage with this problem first as compared to all the other things. Before I move on to my first question, yes?
Being able to speak Korean is popular and prestigious because Korean media is predominantly Korean. K-drama and K-pop in English means that Korean wouldn't be perceived the same way. At least on our side, locals don't believe that their vernacular is barbaric or rural.
I don't think that if the Korean K-pop was not established, the first response would be they are barbarians, because Malaysians does not have that much of an establishment. If you think I'm a barbarian, what to do? To be fair, I am, but yeah, what to do? Right? So I don't think people make these assessments based on whether or not you do this music, right? You needed to prove why that is possible in all these industries. And it's very convenient to use K-pop when they have the most established, successful music industry outside of Hollywood. It's not possible in other contexts, guys. Like, you need to say, why is this the clear context that is applicable in every situation? I don't think you did that. First question on uniqueness of variance language. First of all, I want to point out that in certain aspects of the debate, they tell you that it's similar enough that people will be able to understand it, which means you have no benefit of exposing your identity to the level that you claim, because if it is so similar, then what is the ability for these individuals to do it that way? Secondly is, you can't even infuse additional aspects of your culture because you claim that to some extent it is similar. But then they say it is different enough. If you argue that it is different enough, then all our harms are more likely to materialize, especially because we claim that these differences are the cause of tensions of why people won't listen to music. They tell you that in Singapore you have a dictionary. Who is going to buy a dictionary to translate words that they've heard in songs that they may or may not like? You cannot link these aspects of culture to the debate we are having on music and art when clearly you have not shown the mechanistic link between these two things. Second question, comparative. Now we tell you why it's likely in competition we can be successful. First, like I've mentioned, they are different enough, and they are different enough to sound new, but they are similar enough for other listeners to enjoy because of that point of commonality in terms of speaking the global language. Second is, the more palatability you have with others outside of listeners, but in terms of people in power, the individuals with the structures of deciding who gets concerts, who gets primary airtime interviews, who gets a new album deals, all of these people still argue on the binaries of ones and zeros. Who is going to be more popular? Who is going to be easier to access? Who are the individuals that can claim a large speaking of audience so that they can make my music company more successful? These are the individuals that will then give priority to the young artists on our side, because it is on our side we meet these conditions better. So even in the best case, you argue that competition is difficult. We tell you that we can mitigate this difficulty of competition because we have people of power on our side. Is it regrettable? Sure. Is it disgusting to a certain extent? Again, sure. But again, as a young artist, this is your priority, not your personal identity. Last question on whether or not we still have your identity. Firstly, they don't explain to you why songs are going to be culturally sensitive just because they have variances. We heard Tokyo Drift in the hall just now, and it was largely using slang. Tell me, what was the cultural discussions that talked about why we need to remove ourselves from oppression? No, it's not happening, right? So even if these artists use these variant slangs, to what extent are they sending out this message that, you know what, you white people, you are colonizing me, you're stereotypes, you're giving me a 69 because I speak this language, so you must, who is going to listen to this music? Certainly I'm not going to listen to this music, and if I'm not going to listen to, even Hassan might not listen to this music, and if you've lost Hassan, you've lost everyone. So do people impose their bias through language? Firstly, like we told you, we deconstruct by telling you that these cups are not going to be culturally sensitive. Secondly, we told you it's going to be incredibly difficult to incorporate all of these things while still being likable. And lastly, even PM tells you this is likely going to be a 20 to 30 year time frame. Why is that okay for all the young artists that are going to die out on our side unless you explain to us how is this young artist going to stay young for the next 30 years while doing songs that nobody wants to listen to? Last thing is rules of grammar. Who even uses rules of grammar in songs? I don't think Taylor Swift is going who or whom in their songs, so I don't really think it makes it more difficult to understand for people to listen to music. For those reasons, proud to propose.
Here. Again.
3 years ago, I lost in the quarters of Asia to the handsome boy right there. Look, that's not happening today. 3 parts to this reply. First, I want a critique on their flow. Take note of this, Judge. PM gives you no mechanism on why people appreciate culture. As mentioned, it was characteristics and mentions of self-actualization, proximity. But why is this the dichotomy and context that people appreciate? I don't know. DPM comes up and says, trade off, fuck everything, as long as we're represented. Guff Whip comes up and says, now building the Mac. We can achieve cultural appreciation because this is a language we speak on a daily basis, blah, blah, blah. Basically, disjointed case. I'm not sure what their frame is from the start, whether they actually want success or whether they want representation. The comparatives on our side also disjointed because of the lack of having a coherent frame. Second part of this reply. I understand that this kind of debates, everyone is trying to co-op everything. We have that too. We have that too. I'll explain why their co-ops are lazier and ours was more mature. What are the two co-ops? Number one, they said in their music, you have some English, therefore they can co-op our success. 2 responses. Number one, words in isolation don't mean anything. By our own analysis to explain why. For example, you lose the nuances that make art enticing. And because you also lose the core tenets of art, the cognitive value, the emotional value, all that you miss out, that's why you can't just co-opt that with a small English. Secondly, isn't this hurting your mechanization? Because you explain we have to compete with Taylor Swift and all that, that's why it's bad. But if yours is compete Taylor Swift with some English, that's like double down and worst off in terms of your trajectory of success. Words in isolation don't mean anything. If I hear sex, 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 it won't necessarily mean that I love that song. I'll just be like, a Taylor Swift song that talks about sex and other things will be more interesting. Second co-op by them was monuments and tourism. First response, if their focus is regional influence, why would you get external tourism about your local regional area? Because it just has a tense. Second, regional influence is contingent on your success to achieve that, which I don't think you prove. But thirdly, if the focus now is on Taj Mahal or on monuments, isn't that bad for the local artists because people remember that and not you? That's why their co-ops were lazy and not mechanized to the very degree. What were our co-ops and why were they more realistic? We said agency. And it's quite realistic because we explained when you have a better palatability for global audience, you have better record and sponsorship deals, better access to opportunity that gets your ability to be successful, and then you can talk about it in an interview. Greater success means that you translate to agency because then you're in a position where you're stabilized to access agency. That's why our co-opt of culture is more realistic because our pathway was built as a precursor to that. Second, we explain why culture is something you can practice outside of your job. I don't know why the only metric of practicing your culture is in your job. I'm a debate coach also, but I speak English in debate, but I speak Tamil at home. I'm celebrating my culture in every other way that's meaningful to me. They never explain why the celebration of culture is only when it's back to your job. So I'm unclear why that is a mechanism. To this reply, what is artist fulfillment? Take note, Judge. We don't know if this bloody artist cares about regional influence. We don't know if this artist wants global fame. No one has epistemic access towards the minds of this artist. Our team provides analysis that meets with an average artist, and that's why it's valuable. What are the 2 things we mentioned? Number one, the opportunity to get agency and experience your culture in the long run. Even if it's the case, we don't know what the fella actually wants, whether he wants a big mansion. Sorry, I wanted to go quite bad with that, but never mind. I'm just going to go stick to that. The point is, Whatever you want to do, you can access agency when you actually grow and more successful. Agency and fulfillment of the malleable things you can do is present outside, even palatable towards an average artist. Secondly, information about the sport. Even if it's the case that I don't know if you want fame or I don't know if you want regional influence, every average person in a sport cares about that sport. You want more information about how you can make the songs better. You want more networking with people who can give you more intel. Our side gives you the better pathway of that, because the point in which you frame yourself to be global palatability, you get access to all of the big dogs that gives you that insight that will be valuable to an average person because you truly care about that sport. Malaysia kicked out Singapore of the Malaysian agreement. I think we kicked out NTU from this quarterfinals.
Thank you all for replying to that. This is Robert.
If you want to make a popular song and you tell me that it's going to be about romance and be in English, I would say that you've pointed out the common characteristics of other popular songs. I don't know if this will make your song automatically more popular. They assert that you're brilliant already, so doing this brilliant song in English will be the tipping point to break out. But I don't know why this frame is true, especially given Asan's characterization as to why minority artists are likely to be marginalized and lacking resources in the first place. So I just don't think it's true that most of these artists are on the tipping point of getting a record deal. Those that are likely to be good enough to get signed anyway because of how gifted and exceptional they are. So this debate is about the average artist. In this case, they have no comparative because they can only prove that their songs are easier to understand. They just don't prove how that bridges to success. And this is where we beat them clearly for three premises. The first is we told you that young artists specifically serve young audiences who seek representation of their experience to make them feel unique. This was the Mac that Kuhan asked for that was just there that he just didn't pick up. They are likely to speak in mixed languages because they are torn between an English education and cultural backgrounds from their families. The expression of mixed language is then a unique validation of their existence, especially given the widespread representation of mainstream white music already, which means that the use of mixed language is likely to be seen as specifically novel and relatable. We have specifically the comparative advantage here, because here we don't have to compete to displace Taylor Swift. The average young consumer can still listen to Taylor Swift, but they'll still listen to our song as well because we serve another form of enjoyment and satisfaction that they are not able to then deal with. So what we do is that we modify the way in which we compete against other artists by opening up a playing field where we are uniquely empowered to do well in, and therefore make it so that the game is no longer zero-sum. There's no response specifically against this. The second premise is on the comparative. This is a more realistic bar to clear for success. Opposition may get a song that's easily understood, but there's the missing link between how this song being understood can get more views. Like, I don't know why people start suddenly like finding these artists more often. There's also a missing link between like the views and then the actual success that they get, because just because your songs are viewed fairly often and they are understood does not mean you get an actual record deal. The comparative is on outside the house. I guess at the end of the day, we cannot quantify to what extent are people likely to like us, but if it's the case that some people like us because we uniquely fulfill this particular need for them to feel represented or to talk about the experience in the way in which they want to, because that's literally how it happens in real life, then they're likely to subscribe to your song. They're likely to send a thank you letter. These are all things that are more tangible to quantify that success and keep you going and make you feel as though you're successful. The last thing now is your actualization. There is a special meaning in you being an artist, choosing to use your gift for something that's difficult, in serving an audience that uniquely can be able to connect to. I think this is quite important because I don't think money is the most important thing, especially given how it's not possible for us to prove whether language is the tipping point for success. So you cannot prioritize and choose your career pathway and the work you produce in that particular manner. You have to choose it based on to what extent can you make it so that like happiness can also potentially be built in some particular way, and it's on outside the house uniquely that we're able to fill this in. Note then that although that trade-off is contingent on them being extremely successful in getting like a mansion, in being able to wear clothes and then people caring about what you wear. This is in the minute situation where they get success, but they don't prove why it's the case that they get success. So they simply cannot use these trade-offs for the comparative. Then on the way up now, the way up is just this. On that side of the house, it might be the case that one or two more minority artists get somehow more exposure because the song is really, really that good. And then if it was English, they would be really successful. But I'm not quite sure if a few of these artists being, like just one or two, being successful and making a lot of money is a good outcome. Like, I actually just cannot tell what is the societal outcome out of this. But on the comparative, on outside the house, all artists have a new way of competing and a new form of achievement towards happiness. That's a massive benefit in terms of skill. But additionally, all listeners are able to access a certain kind of actualization in getting a new form of music created that specifically cater towards their taste and their needs. And in their work, that's completely absent. So in terms of scale of impact, we clearly win because at the end of the day, like we just serve more people, we give them more tangible benefits. Guys, don't worry, I'm going home. My flight is on Friday. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
No offense. No offense.
Don't worry about it. Thank you.